conflict management. A conflict is an inseparable part of any business operation. That's why most of the organizations are focusing towards identifying effective strategies that can help them in managing the conflict occurring in their organization. So basically it is a state of unresolved differences within an individual. The differences can be internal or external, maybe between two persons or two teams. So that's why it says differences within an individual. Then it can also be between different individuals and between groups. So conflict is basically any sort of unresolved differences occurring between two individuals, groups, or within an individual. So to make this meaning clearer, let's suppose there are 5 groups: group A, group B, group C, D and E. So this doesn't mean that the conflict can be only between these two or these two, but the same can flow in any direction. This can either be from B to C, from A to E. So anywhere there are indifferences, so we can say that there is existence of conflict in the organization. So this is a pictorial representation of what actually a conflict is. Now these conflicts can be of several types depending on the situation and nature of people and the organization. So it can either be a role conflict. As the name suggests, role conflict is something that is very much related to the role that the person is playing in the organization. Then it can be a team conflict. Now how do you identify whether there is a conflict or just a simple conversation? So there are some features that make you understand whether there is actually a conflict or not. One is it has to be a conscious act. Whenever you can see that the indifferences are being created consciously, so that means there is existence of conflict. Secondly, it has to be personal. Third, it is intermittent. Then it has universal existence, like issues like pay. And last, it is causing some emotional imbalance. So these are the features through which one can identify that whether a conflict exists in an organization or not. After this, let's move to the most common sources of organizational conflict. There are majorly 6 sources through which a conflict or a matter of conflict occurs. The very first source is your organizational structure itself, means the way things are structured in an organization, are many a times a major reason for the conflict. Then there are your amount of resources. If the resources are less, then there are fair chances that a conflict can exist. Then task interdependence. The fourth source is impossible goals. Let's suppose the people are burdened with such goals that are in reality impossible to achieve. So this can be a great reason for a conflict to exist. Then obviously personality differences that occurs in almost every big or small organization. And lastly, there is some major communication problem. So these 6 sources play a major role in the occurrence of a conflict in any organization. Now, in addition to the sources from which a conflict is arising, you need to know that these conflicts can be again in different levels. Where we talked about individual itself, it is called the interpersonal level. In this, the conflict occurs within the individual. Then secondly, there is a role level where the conflict is between the person and his role in the organization. Then thirdly, it gets intergroup, like between two teams. Then it can be a multi-party conflict wherein some third party is involved in the conflict. And lastly, it goes international. So this is the levels of conflict in increasing order, which can be from within an individual to an international level. Now, as we have different levels of a conflict, similarly we also have different levels of resolution of these conflicts. Here is how one can resolve these conflicts. So we to take them as levels of resolution. This means there are different levels in which any conflict can be sorted out. These levels are broadly categorized into 5 main categories. The very basic level of resolution is simply to stop. This means you just stop the conflict and move ahead. The second is to settle it down. In this, the two parties talk to each other and settle the conflict. Third is resolve. Then is forgive. And lastly, reconcile. So these are the levels from down to up in which a resolution can be made for the conflicts existing in an organization. Moving to the different stages of conflict management. Now, after learning the ways in which conflict can be resolved, let's see the different stages that are involved in the process. The very first stage is potential opposition. Of incompatibility. The very first problem that can arise is an initial opposition due to incompatibility of two parties. Now you can imagine when two parties are in conflict, so it definitely means there is some indifference between the two. At a very first level, difficult to make them sit and talk. Then second is cognition and personalization. To resolve a conflict, they need to personalize with each other. Then third, they need to have that intention of getting the thing resolved. Fourthly, the behavior at the time of resolution, this plays a major role, and lastly the final outcome. Now specifically focusing on the outcome of a conflict resolution, we can say that this outcome can be both positive or negative. Positive outcome would be an increased performance, like if the conflict is resolved effectively, then the performance will increase altogether, and the negative outcome would be decreased performance. So after the conflict management has taken place, these are the two major outcomes that can turn up. If we get into deeper, there are some situations that makes it clear whether the outcome is positive or negative. So this will tell us what kind of outcome we consider positive and what is negative. Now positive outcome would be consideration of a broader range of ideas, then increased participation, and healthy interaction. If these three factors are existing, this means that the conflict resolution had a positive outcome. And when we can say that it is negative, when there is much more increased level of stress. Secondly, there is a feeling of defeat among the parties. Third, decreased productivity, and poor work relations. So here is how we can identify whether the outcome of a conflict management was positive or negative. Now let's understand the very specific and crucial causes behind any indifference to occur. One is differing values. This is very common that all have been born and brought up in different situations, so they have different values. Then many people have this habit of making unnecessary assumptions, which again leads to conflict. Thirdly, differing expectations. This again is a great reason for conflict. Differences in ways one is brought up. This is very much similar to the first point. In ways one is brought up. Then knowledge and ability to deal with conflict. So these are 5 main reasons that can lead to a negative outcome. Now let's move to a very important topic in this chapter, which can be of use for different organizations, and these are your conflict management strategies. Means in what all ways one can look forward to resolve the conflict existing within an organization. So basically, whenever we wish to resolve a conflict, there are two concerns that we are looking forward to. One is achieving personal goals, which is the prime for every individual, and second is keeping good relationship with the person. So these are two major concerns that are in back of the mind while adopting any conflict management strategy. So one very effective and highly used conflict management strategy is known as conflict negotiation, which is nothing but a process wherein both the parties sit together and reach at a common decision. We call it conflict negotiation. As the name suggests, it is a common process designed to anticipate, contain and resolve disputes to reach at mutually acceptable solutions. To reach at mutually acceptable solutions. For conflict negotiation to take place, there are 5 main components that have to be present. The first component is the parties that are involved, because without the presence of parties no negotiation can take place. Then interest of parties, just the existence won't make a difference, the persons have to be interested to resolve. Then third is relationship between parties, there should be some kind of relationship within the parties, then only they can sit and talk. Then interaction, and finally the results achieved. So conflict negotiation is a willing activity from both the ends. Without this, the same cannot be done effectively. So the negotiation process follows certain sequential steps, and the process is wherein you and your counterpart, they are asked to come and interact so these two parties interact, and then the negotiation process takes place, wherein people come up with mutually acceptable solution. So this is the entire negotiation process, wherein first both the parties come and interact, and then they negotiate finally to come up with mutually acceptable solution. So this negotiation can take place in 3 ways depending on the nature of conflict and the time frame. So these 3 ways are: one is simple negotiation, then mediation, and lastly arbitration. These are 3 specific ways in which conflicts are resolved in any organization. In negotiation, there is voluntary participation, and outcome. When both the parties are voluntarily associated and interacting to reach an outcome, we call it negotiation. Then in mediation, there is a neutral third party that helps them to reach at a mutual agreement. And in arbitration, arbitration is non-voluntary, means when the situation gets worse, they are asked to come and resolve the issue. So it is a non-voluntary wherein participants have least control. So these are the three ways in which conflict negotiation can take place. Now there are some common steps in all these processes which we call as the steps of conflict negotiation, which include preparation for planning, definition of ground rules, clarification, means every party explain their side, then they bargain, so there is bargaining, then finally closure and the implementation. So this is all about conflict negotiation.